The silence in the Special Collections archive was a living thing. It was composed of the gentle sigh of aging paper, the ghost of leather polish and the faint, sweet scent of decay that clung to forgotten words. For Elara, this silence was a symphony, a sanctuary from the clamor of the city above. Here in the library's dusty heart she was not the shy, stammering woman who ordered her groceries online to avoid small talk, but a meticulous historian, a guardian of whispers. Her current project was the Denison Private Collection, a curious acquisition the library had received but never catalogued. It was a jumble of forgotten histories, unbound manuscripts, and boxes of letters tied with faded ribbon. For weeks, Elara had meticulously worked her way through it, her gloved fingers treating each artifact with a reverence others reserved for holy relics. At the very bottom of the last crate she found it. It was a book unlike any she had ever seen. Bound in dark, supple leather that seemed to drink the low light of the archive, it was utterly devoid of markings. No title, no author, no seal. It was its anonymity that drew her in, but it was the strange, subtle vibration against her fingertips that held her captive. It felt like a low hum, a current of energy that pulsed just beneath the surface of the leather. Curiosity, a rare and reckless emotion for her, won out over archivist protocol. She lifted the book, its weight substantial, solid. The air around it seemed to shimmer, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from her desk lamp. A feeling of profound age emanated from it, a sense of slumbering power that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She ran a gloved finger along its spine, the strange thrumming intensifying, traveling up her arm like a jolt of static electricity. It felt alive. Hesitantly, Elara pulled off one of her thin cotton gloves. The cool, dry air of the basement washed over her bare skin, and she flinched, always more comfortable with a barrier between herself and the world. She had to know if the sensation was real. Her breath hitched as she extended her hand, her fingers trembling slightly. The moment her skin made contact with the ancient leather, the world exploded in white-hot agony. A searing pain, sharp and blinding, shot from her fingertips up her arm, straight to her heart. She cried out, a strangled sound swallowed by the oppressive silence of the archive. She tried to pull away, but her hand was fused to the book, the energy within it roaring to life, lashing out at her touch. Through the haze of pain, she watched in horror as a network of shimmering silver lines bloomed across the back of her hand, branching out from her knuckles like frost on a windowpane before coalescing into an intricate, knot-like symbol. The silver mark burned with the intensity of a brand, searing itself into her flesh. Just as she thought the pain would make her pass out, it stopped. A sudden, jarring snap echoed not in the room but in her very soul. It was the sound of a bond locking into place, an invisible, unbreakable chain stretching out from her, out of the library and across the sprawling city, connecting her to something. Or someone. Panting, clutching her marked hand to her chest, Elara stared at the book, which now lay innocently on the table, the humming silenced. The quiet of the archive no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like the held breath before a scream. Chapter 2. The Alpha's Awakening. For a century, Lucian had cultivated solitude. It was a fortress built from discipline and necessity, its walls fortified by the weight of the secrets he guarded. His penthouse apartment, a sterile cage of glass and steel overlooking the city, was more of a watchtower than a home. From here he could feel the pulse of his territory, the subtle shifts in the power dynamics of the shadows. He was the Alpha, the protector of the arcane knowledge his pack had bled for over generations. He was a predator and his city was his hunting ground. He was standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights a sprawling tapestry of cold fire below when the bond struck. It was not a gentle awakening. It was a cataclysmic shock, a lightning bolt to his very soul. One moment he was encased in his customary controlled isolation. The next an incandescent connection slammed into him, a bond so profound and absolute it buckled his knees. He staggered back, a guttural snarl tearing from his throat as he clutched his chest. It was a mate bond. The realization was a punch to the gut. It was impossible. He was too old, his line too far removed from the raw magic of their ancestors for such a fated connection to manifest. Mating was a choice for his kind now, a political alliance, not this soul-deep claiming. A frantic, primal energy surged through him, an instinct he hadn't felt in decades. He could feel her. A presence soft and terrified, now inextricably linked to his own. And beneath that connection he felt the thrum of the book. His disbelief curdled into a cold, murderous rage. The archive. Someone had breached their sanctum. Someone had dared to lay hands on their most sacred text, the heart of their pack's history and power. Only a fool or a powerful enemy would be so bold. The searing brand of the bond was proof they had not only touched it, but activated its deepest magic. He stormed through his apartment, the controlled mask of the city mogul shattering to reveal the ruthless alpha beneath. His eyes bled from cool gray to molten gold. He ripped his shirt from his body, his muscles coiling and shifting under his skin as raw power surged through him. Thief. A rival sorcerer, perhaps attempting to steal the secrets his family had died to protect. He didn't take the elevator. He launched himself from the balcony, a dark shape plummeting through the night air. He landed silently in the alley below, the impact barely registering. The city was a blur of neon and shadow as he moved through it, a phantom of purpose and fury. His senses, already preternaturally sharp, were now hyper-focused, drawn by the luminous thread of the new bond. It was a beacon in the darkness, leading him not to a rival pack's stronghold or a hidden magical enclave, but to the grand Gothic structure of the city's central library. He could feel her terror, a frantic, fluttering heartbeat that echoed his own pounding pulse. He could smell the ozone scent of activated magic clinging to the old stone. He didn't slow as he approached the massive oak doors. With a roar that was more beast than man, he slammed into them, his rage a physical force that splintered wood and shattered the hallowed silence within. He was coming and hell was coming with him. Chapter 3. Collision of Worlds. The silence that followed Elara's scream was more terrifying than the pain. She was alone in the cavernous basement, her heartbeat a frantic drum against her ribs. The silver mark on her hand had cooled to a dull ache, but it pulsed with a faint internal light, a permanent and terrifying reminder of what had just happened. The book lay open on the heavy oak table, its pages seeming to mock her with their placid stillness. Her sanctuary had become a cage, the familiar shadows twisting into menacing shapes. Suddenly, a deafening crash ripped through the basement, echoing off the stone walls. It wasn't the sound of a door being opened, but of one being annihilated. Elara shrieked, stumbling back as the remnants of the reinforced archive door exploded inward. A figure filled the doorway, a silhouette of raw power and barely contained violence against the dim light of the hallway. He was a storm in human form. Tall and broad-shouldered, with an aura of primal authority that sucked the very air from the room. He moved with a predator's grace, his steps silent on the debris-strewn floor. His eyes, burning with a furious golden light, scanned the room before locking onto her. The moment their gazes met, the world tilted on its axis. The bond, a vague and terrifying pull moments before, now ignited. It was a physical force, a tidal wave of sensation that crashed over Elara, leaving her breathless. She saw rage in his eyes, but beneath it she felt a shock of recognition that mirrored her own, a sense of impossible familiarity. It was terrifying, and yet a traitorous part of her felt a sense of clicking into place. Lucian froze, every predatory instinct in him screeching to a halt. He had expected a sorcerer cloaked in wards, a rival shifter snarling in challenge. He had expected a thief hardened and dangerous. He had not expected this. A small human woman, her wide, terrified eyes the color of old honey, her scent a dizzying mix of paper, dust and pure, unadulterated fear. And she was the source of the cataclysm that had upended his entire existence. He stalked forward, his shadow swallowing her. Thief, he snarled, the word a low, guttural vibration that she felt in her bones. Tears pricked at Elara's eyes. "Oh, she stammered, holding her marked hand to her chest. "I don't know what happened." His gaze dropped to her hand and his golden eyes widened, the fury within them escalating. The silver mark pulsed, a perfect match to the ancient script within the book. "You lie," he growled, his voice dangerously soft. "You have claimed what is not yours." He reached for the book, his fingers brushing the edge of the leather. The moment he made contact, a violent arc of silver energy erupted from the cover, striking him with the force of a physical blow. He was thrown back, skidding several feet across the stone floor with a grunt of pain and surprise. The energy didn't harm him, but it repelled him, a magical ward keyed to a new master. He rose slowly, his gaze now fixed on her not just with anger, but with a dawning, horrified understanding. She hadn't just touched the book. The book had chosen her. The bond wasn't just an alert, it was a chain. And this terrified human woman held the other end. Chapter 4. The Unbreakable Chain. A tense, suffocating silence descended upon the archive, broken only by Elara's ragged breaths. The man, the creature, stared at her, his golden eyes narrowed with a frustration so potent it was almost a physical force. He was trapped. The realization radiated from him in waves of barely suppressed violence. The book had marked her, and in doing so had made her inviolable to him. He couldn't take it, and some deep, gut-wrenching instinct told him he couldn't harm her without feeling the echo of that pain tenfold through their newly forged bond. He began to pace, a caged tiger in the narrow aisle between bookshelves. His presence was overwhelming, shrinking the already cramped space until Elara felt like she couldn't breathe. His scent filled the air, a wild, musky aroma of pine, earth, and something uniquely masculine and dangerous. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the floor. "Nothing," Elara insisted, her voice trembling but gaining a desperate edge of indignation. "I'm an archivist. I was cataloging the collection. I just touched it." He stopped pacing and pinned her with a look of utter disbelief. "No one just touches the archive of souls. It has lain dormant for a century waiting. What are you?" "I'm a librarian," she cried, the absurdity of the situation threatening to overwhelm her. He saw the genuine terror and confusion in her eyes, and a flicker of doubt crossed his features. She didn't have the aura of a sorceress or the bearing of a rival. She looked breakable. And yet she now held the key to his pack's entire legacy. His demeanor shifted, the raw fury receding into a cold, grim purpose. "Your name," he commanded. It was not a request. "Elara." "Lucian," he returned, the name sounding like stone grinding against stone. "The book's activation will not have gone unnoticed. My enemies will have felt its pulse just as I did. They will be coming. Here." A new kind of fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Elara's confusion. Enemies? People were coming here for the book? For her? "We have to call the police," she whispered, her rational mind grasping for some semblance of normalcy. Lucian let out a short, harsh laugh. "The police will not stop what is coming for you." The possessive way he said sent a shiver down her spine. He was no longer just angry, he was territorial. She was now linked to his property, and by extension she had become his problem. His to protect. To prove she wasn't a threat, Elara reached a shaky hand towards the open book, intending to close it. But as her fingers neared the vellum, the silver mark on her hand flared with warmth. Her hand was guided by an unseen force, her fingertips drawn not to the cover, but to a specific illuminated passage on the right-hand page. The moment she touched it, the script glowed with a brilliant silver light. A complex, shimmering map bloomed across the page, its lines and symbols swirling into existence, visible only to the two of them in the dim light. Lucian was at her side in an instant, his body heat scorching through her thin blouse. He stared down at the glowing map, his breath hitching. It was a passage, a key they had believed lost for generations. And it had revealed itself only to her. His gaze lifted from the book to her face, his expression a maelstrom of shock, fury, and a dawning, reluctant awe. "Gods," he breathed, the sound raw. "You're not a thief. You're the key." His hand shot out, not to harm but to grip her arm, his touch a brand of ownership. "And they are coming to claim you." Chapter 5. A claim in the silence. The glowing map on the page was a death warrant. Lucian knew it in his bones. The secrets it pointed to were the very ones his oldest enemies, a cabal of ruthless shifter mercenaries known as the Scorned, had been hunting for decades. They would tear the city apart to get to it. To get to her. "We're leaving. Now," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. His grip on her arm was like steel. He pulled her away from the table, and the moment his bare skin made direct contact with hers, a searing jolt of pure, undiluted desire arced between them. It was nothing like the painful branding of the book. This was a different kind of fire, a primal, carnal energy that slammed into Elara with the force of a physical blow. Her knees went weak, a gasp escaping her lips. Through the bond she felt an echo of his own shock, a wave of raw, possessive lust so powerful it was suffocating. His golden eyes darkened, the pupils blowing wide as he stared down at her, his fury momentarily eclipsed by a far more dangerous hunger. He backed her up against a towering shelf of forgotten lore, the hard spines of the books digging into her back. He didn't release her arm. Instead, his other hand came up to cage her, his palm slamming flat against the shelf beside her head. His body was a wall of heat and muscle, trapping her completely. The dusty, quiet archive was suddenly charged with a thick, electric tension. "What is this?" he growled, his voice a low rumble in his chest. The question was for himself as much as it was for her. A century of iron-willed control was unraveling in the face of this overwhelming, instinctual need to claim the human trembling before him. Elara's fear was a frantic bird beating against her ribs, but beneath it, a strange and terrifying new sensation was unfurling in her belly. A liquid heat that pooled low and deep, a direct, traitorous response to his proximity. His scent was intoxicating, flooding her senses and short-circuiting her thoughts. She could feel the hard planes of his chest against her, the powerful thud of his heart. She should be screaming, fighting, but her body was frozen, mesmerized by the raw power radiating from him. "I don't know," she whispered, her eyes locked on his. She saw the predator there, the ruthless alpha, but she also saw the conflict, the raw edges of a connection that mirrored the bewildering pull she felt. His gaze dropped to her mouth. "You smell of fear," he murmured, his head lowering, his breath ghosting across her lips. "And something else. Something that is mine." Before she could process the possessive declaration, his mouth was on hers. It wasn't a kiss of seduction or affection. It was a kiss of branding, a soul-stealing, desperate act of possession. It was harsh and demanding, his lips crashing against hers, his tongue plunging into her mouth to taste her, to claim her. The sheer force of it should have been terrifying, but instead, it was the final spark on a hidden powder keg. A moan tore from Elara's throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock and pleasure. Her mind screamed in protest, but her body betrayed her completely. Her hands, of their own accord, came up to fist in his shirt, pulling him closer. She kissed him back, a frantic, clumsy response that was pure instinct. With that kiss, she was no longer just an accidental recipient of the mark. She was an active participant, a willing link in the chain. He broke the kiss with a ragged groan, his forehead resting against hers. Their breaths mingled, harsh and heavy in the charged silence. The world had irrevocably shifted. The bond, forged in magic and pain, had just been sealed in the most carnal way imaginable. For both of them, the terrifying realization dawned. This connection was not just magical. It was absolute, and it would consume them both. Chapter 6. Flight from the Sanctum. The echo of the kiss lingered between them, a ghost of heat and possessiveness in the cold, dusty air. But the spell was shattered by Lucian's raw urgency. He pulled back, his jaw tight, the gold in his eyes sharpening from molten desire to the hard, calculating glint of a predator on the hunt. The momentary connection was severed, replaced by the grim reality of their situation. "That was a mistake," he growled, the words a low rumble of self-recrimination. He grabbed the ancient book from the table, his touch now careful, avoiding direct contact with the leather as if it were hot iron. He shoved it into Elara's arms. "Hold this. Do not let it go, and do not let anyone take it from you." The book felt warm against her skin, a familiar, humming weight. Her lips still tingled from the force of his kiss, and a bewildering mix of terror and a strange, deep-seated longing churned within her. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Who is coming for us?" "Mercenaries," he said, moving toward the ruined doorway, his senses scanning the darkness beyond. "A pack of shifter outcasts who call themselves the Scorned. They hunt magical artifacts, and the Archive of Souls is the greatest prize of all. They felt its awakening. They will have traced the energy signature here." He turned back to her, his expression grim. "And now that signature is you. To them you are no longer a person. You are the lock, and they will not hesitate to break you to get to the prize." His words painted a terrifying picture, dragging her out of her quiet, predictable world and into a nightmare of shadows and monsters. As he led her through the debris of the door and into the labyrinthine corridors of the library's basement, The bond between them became a taut wire of communication. She could feel his urgency, a thrumming high-strung tension that vibrated through her own nerves. In turn, he could feel her fear, a frantic rabbit-like pulse that grated on his predatory instincts, making him want to both soothe her and snarl at her to be silent. They didn't take the main stairs. Lucian led her through a series of staff corridors and up a narrow winding staircase reserved for maintenance, his movements silent and fluid. Every creak of the old building, every distant siren from the city outside, made Elara jump. Lucian's hand never left her arm, his grip a painful grounding reminder that this was real. He was her captor and, paradoxically, her only protector. They emerged into the vast, moonlit reading room on the main floor. The towering cathedral windows cast long, eerie shadows across the rows of empty tables. The silence here was different from the comfortable quiet of her archive. It was a hollow, expectant silence, pregnant with danger. "They'll have the main entrance watched," Lucian murmured, his eyes scanning the cavernous space. He pulled her toward a tall, arched window at the far end of the room, one that overlooked a narrow, dark alley. With a grunt of effort, he unlatched the heavy bronze lock and pushed the window open, letting in the cool, damp night air, thick with the smell of rain and exhaust fumes. "We're going to jump?" Elara squeaked, looking down at the two-story drop. "I will jump," he corrected, his gaze intense. "You will hold on." Before she could protest, he scooped her into his arms. Her shriek was muffled against his chest as he swung her out the window. For a heart-stopping second, they were suspended in the air, the city sprawling around them. Then they were falling. Chapter 7: The Gilded Cage. The landing was a miracle of controlled force that barely jarred her. Lucian absorbed the impact with a grace that defied his size, landing in a crouch in the darkened alley before straightening and setting her on her feet. Elara's legs felt like jelly and she stumbled, her hand flying to her chest where her heart hammered against her ribs. He didn't give her a moment to recover. His hand clamped around her wrist and he pulled her into a run, melting into the shadows of the pre-dawn city. They moved with a speed that felt supernatural. He avoided the main streets, navigating a web of back alleys and forgotten lanes she never knew existed. The world was a blur of brick walls, overflowing dumpsters and the distant glow of streetlights. Within minutes they arrived at a sleek, impossibly tall skyscraper of black glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. He led her through a private underground entrance, his thumbprint granting them access to an elevator that shot upward with silent, stomach-lurching speed. The doors opened directly into his penthouse. The change in environment was so abrupt it gave Elara vertigo. From the dusty organic clutter of her beloved archive, she was now in a vast minimalist space of gleaming chrome, black leather and floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the awakening city like a piece of art. It was beautiful, sterile and utterly soulless. It was a cage and she was the new specimen. "Put the book on the table," he ordered, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. He was already moving, his tense energy filling the space. He shrugged off his torn jacket, revealing a physique that was all lean, hard muscle. "Don't touch it again unless I tell you to." Elara did as she was told, her hands trembling as she set the ancient tome on a massive polished concrete table. "What now?" she asked, feeling small and utterly out of place. "Now you stay here and you don't leave," he said, turning to face her. "This building is warded. It is the safest place for you in this city." "For me or for the book?" The question slipped out, sharper than she intended. His golden eyes narrowed. "For the book you are the key. For me you are the complication." He stalked towards a hallway. "There is a guest room. You can clean up. There are clothes in the closet." The dismissal was clear. Elara stood frozen for a moment, a storm of defiance and fear warring within her. He was a prisoner, a valuable object to be guarded. When she finally moved, her legs carried her down the hall to the indicated room. It was as impersonal as the rest of the penthouse, dominated by a large bed with crisp gray sheets. The closet held a selection of simple, expensive-looking clothes, black leggings, cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, all in her size. The discovery was unsettling, implying a level of foresight that chilled her. She showered quickly, the hot water doing little to wash away the feeling of his touch, his scent, the memory of his lips on hers. When she emerged, wrapped in a plush towel, she found him standing in the doorway of the bedroom, holding a glass of water. His presence instantly made the room feel small and charged. The bond between them hummed, a low, constant vibration of awareness. He could feel her unease and she could feel the tightly leashed power simmering just beneath his skin. "The scorned will learn the book is bound to you," he said, his voice low and serious. "They will understand they can't take it by force. They can only take it from your corpse." Chapter 8. Echoes in the Blood. The weight of Lucian's words settled over Elara like a shroud. "They can only take it from your corpse." The statement echoed in the sterile silence of the penthouse, transforming her reality into a simple, brutal equation. She was the book and the book was her life. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every sound from the city below a potential enemy. She spent the night huddled in the center of the massive, unfamiliar bed, her senses on a razor's edge. Lucian did not sleep either. Through the thin, vibrant thread of their bond, Elara could feel him. He was a restless predator, pacing the length of his gilded cage, his energy a potent mix of controlled fury and heightened vigilance. She felt his senses sweeping over the city, a low-level thrum of power that was both terrifying and strangely reassuring. He was the monster who had kidnapped her, but he was also the shield standing between her and other worse monsters. Morning brought no relief, only a harsh gray light that filtered through the panoramic windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The city looked peaceful from this height, a world away from the violence that had shattered her life. Drawn by an impulse she didn't understand, Elara left the bedroom and found the book still sitting on the concrete table. It seemed to call to her, the faint hum she'd felt in the archive now a silent song only she could hear. Lucian was there in an instant, appearing from the hallway as if summoned by her intent. "I told you not to touch it." "I wasn't going to," she defended herself, though it was a lie. Her fingers had been itching to feel the leather again. "I don't understand what it is. What it wants." He stared at the book, his expression a mixture of reverence and resentment. "It's not a thing. It's a legacy. A repository." He hesitated, his gaze shifting to her, to the silver mark that was a faint, shimmering pattern against her skin. "It holds the memories, the knowledge, and the very souls of my ancestors. It is our history, our power, and our burden." Driven by a desperate need for answers, Elara reached out, her fingers brushing the spine before he could stop her. This time there was no searing pain. Instead, the moment her skin made contact, a torrent of sensations flooded her mind. It wasn't a vision but a chaotic, overwhelming deluge of sensory fragments. The scent of wood smoke and blood. The clang of steel on steel. A woman's whispered lullaby in a language she'd never heard. The exhilarating feeling of running on 4 feet through a moonlit forest. It was too much, a cacophony of lives lived and deaths witnessed. She cried out, stumbling back, her hand flying to her head. Lucian caught her, his hands closing around her upper arms, steadying her. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice a sharp anchor in the swirling chaos. "Focus on my voice. Push it back." His touch was a brand grounding her. Through the bond, she felt him project a sense of calm, a wall of disciplined thought that helped her shove the intrusive echoes away. Panting, she leaned against him, the hard wall of his chest a solid reality. "What was that?" she gasped. "The book is attuning to you," he explained, his voice low and close to her ear. His breath was warm against her skin. "It has accepted you as its keeper. It's trying to share its knowledge, but you are not trained to receive it. It could shatter your mind." The shared intimacy of the moment was undeniable. He was holding her, guiding her through the terrifying magic that now coursed through her veins. His proximity, the sheer masculine power of him, was both a comfort and a threat to her composure. He seemed to realize it at the same moment she did. His grip on her arms gentled, his thumbs stroking her skin in a gesture that was unconsciously possessive. The memory of their kiss, raw and claiming, flared between them. "I have to teach you," he murmured, his voice thick with a new, dangerous emotion. "I have to teach you how to control it. How to close yourself off." His gaze dropped to her lips, and she knew he wasn't just talking about the book anymore. Chapter 9. The Scent of the Hunt. The fragile truce born from shared magic was short-lived. Lucian released her as if burned, stepping back to put a necessary distance between them. The air crackled with unspoken tension, with the raw, inconvenient desire that the bond amplified between them. He turned away from her, his broad back a wall of tense muscle, and stalked towards the window. "The lessons will begin tonight," he stated, his voice clipped and formal again. "For now, stay away from it." The day passed in a suffocating silence. Elara felt like a ghost haunting the edges of Lucian's life. She ate the food he ordered, watched the city move below, and tried to read one of the generic novels left in the guest room, but the words were just black marks on a page. Her entire being was focused on two things: the humming book on the table and the restless predator who shared her prison. She could feel his constant sweeping surveillance of the city, a low-grade hum of power that was a permanent fixture in the back of her mind. Late in the afternoon the change came. It wasn't a loud noise or a sudden movement. It was a subtle shift in the energy of the penthouse. Lucian, who had been staring out the window for the better part of an hour, went utterly still. Elara felt it through the bond first. A sudden sharp spike of lethal intent, cold and clean as a shard of ice. His head tilted and a low, almost inaudible growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. He didn't look at her. "They're here," he said softly. "In the city. I can smell them on the wind." A cold dread washed over Elara. The vague threat was no longer a distant possibility. It was a concrete presence. They were being hunted. Lucian moved with a sudden, explosive purpose. He strode to a keypad on the wall, his fingers flying across the surface. With a series of soft clicks, heavy metal shutters began to descend over the massive windows, plunging the penthouse into a dim, artificial twilight and sealing them off from the outside world. He crossed to a heavy chest she hadn't noticed before, keyed in another code and opened it. The contents made her stomach clench. It was an arsenal of weapons that were a brutal mix of ancient and modern. Gleaming silver knives lay next to sleek black firearms. He selected a handgun, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency, and a wicked-looking blade with a handle carved from bone. He turned and strode towards her, his golden eyes blazing with a chilling light. He was no longer the reluctant guardian. He was the alpha preparing for war. He pressed the cold, heavy hilt of a smaller silver knife into her hand. Her fingers fumbled to grip it. "This won't kill a shifter," he said, his voice a low, urgent command. "But it will burn them. It will slow them down. If they get past me, you do not hesitate. You aim for the eyes or the throat. Do you understand?" She could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. The conflict in him was a palpable thing, a storm she could feel through their connection. The alpha's instinct to shield her, to hide her from all harm, was at war with the pragmatic warrior who knew she might be the last line of defense for the archive. She was his greatest treasure and his most profound weakness. "Get in the bedroom. Stay away from the door," he ordered, his attention already shifting towards the main entrance of the penthouse, his head cocked as if listening to a sound only he could hear. "They're clever. They will not come from where I expect." Chapter 10. A Storm at the Gates. Elara retreated to the bedroom as commanded, the silver knife feeling alien and heavy in her hand. She backed into the farthest corner, her eyes glued to the closed door, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The thick, soundproof walls of the penthouse did little to comfort her. Through the bond she could feel Lucian's senses stretched to their breaking point. He was a tightly coiled spring of violence, every fiber of his being focused on the threat outside their walls. She could feel him pacing the main room, a caged wolf scenting its rivals. The silence was the worst part. It stretched and warped, filled with an unbearable tension. She could feel his focus shift from the main door to the exterior walls, then to the ventilation systems. He was hunting for the point of attack. A flicker of movement in her peripheral vision made her gasp. It was just her own reflection in the dark glass of the bedside lamp. Suddenly, a new sensation flooded the bond, something that didn't come from Lucian. It was a cold, slithering feeling like oily fingers probing at the edges of her consciousness. It was a psychic attack, a subtle, magical intrusion searching for a weakness. She felt a wave of nausea and staggered, clutching her head. Instantly she felt Lucian's mental presence roar to life, forming a protective wall around her mind. The intrusion was violently repelled. A furious snarl echoed through their connection, a promise of retribution. "They are trying to get to you through the book." His thought, not spoken but felt, was a clear and terrifying warning. Then chaos erupted. It wasn't a single sound but a symphony of destruction. First, a high-pitched whine crescendoed until the reinforced shutters over the bedroom window buckled inward with a deafening shriek of tortured metal. At the same moment, the main door to the penthouse exploded, not from a physical blow, but from a concussive blast of raw energy that sent splinters of wood and metal flying. Lucian's roar of pure, untamed fury shook the entire apartment. Elara risked a glance out the bedroom door and saw him standing in the center of the living room, a formidable silhouette against the flashing emergency lights. He was changing. His form seemed to swell, his shoulders broadening, his hands lengthening into claws. The air around him shimmered with power, his features sharpening into something more lupin, more savage. His eyes were no longer just gold. They were blazing suns of pure rage. Two figures scrambled through the ruined main door. They were fast, moving in a low crouch like animals. They were bigger than normal men, their eyes glowing with a faint, predatory red in the dim light. They scorned. Lucian met their charge with the force of a hurricane. The sounds were brutal, visceral. The wet crunch of impact, guttural snarls, the sharp crack of bone. He moved with a speed and ferocity that was terrifying to behold, a blur of claws and fury. While he was engaged, a third figure appeared at the mangled bedroom window. This one was leaner, quicker. It slipped through the gap in the shutters like a serpent, its red eyes immediately locking onto Elara. A cruel smile stretched its too wide mouth. It ignored the fight raging in the other room, its sole focus on its prize. Fear, cold and absolute, seized her. Lucian was occupied. He couldn't help her. The shifter took a step towards her, and the words Lucian had burned into her mind echoed. "You do not hesitate." Her hand, slick with sweat, tightened around the silver knife. It was her or him. Her life or the book's secrets. As the creature lunged, Elara screamed, a sound of pure terror and defiance, and thrust the blade forward with all her strength. Chapter 11. First Blood. The shifter's lunge was a blur of motion, a nightmare of teeth and claws aimed at her throat. Time seemed to warp, slowing to a crawl. Elara didn't think, she reacted. With a scream that was equal parts terror and raw defiance, she thrust the silver knife forward. She didn't aim. She just pushed the cold, alien metal into the path of the oncoming monster. She felt a jarring impact run up her arm. The creature let out a shocked, inhuman screech as the silver blade sliced across its shoulder. It wasn't a deep wound, but where the metal touched, flesh sizzled and smoked, the acrid smell of burning hair and meat filling the air. The shifter staggered back, its red eyes wide with pained surprise, clutching its cauterized wound. That single moment of hesitation was all Lucian needed. With a final brutal snap of bone, he dispatched the second shifter in the main room and spun, his half-shifted form a study in lethal grace. His blazing golden eyes took in the scene, the wounded shifter and Elara standing pale and trembling but alive, the bloody knife still clutched in her hand. A sound ripped from Lucian's throat that was no longer human. It was a possessive, territorial roar of pure, unadulterated rage. The sight of an enemy so close to her, of his mate in danger, shattered the last of his restraint. He crossed the room in a single impossible bound, a dark phantom of vengeance. The third shifter had no time to react. Lucian's claws, now fully extended and gleaming like obsidian, tore through it with devastating force. It was over in a second of shocking final violence. The sudden, ringing silence was almost as deafening as the chaos that preceded it. The penthouse was a war zone. Bodies lay broken on the floor, and the smell of blood and ozone hung heavy in the air. Lucian stood over the last shifter, his chest heaving, his entire body trembling with the savage adrenaline of the fight. Slowly, the monster's features receded. His claws shortened, his face softened back into human planes, but his eyes remained molten gold as he turned them on Elara. He stalked towards her, and for a terrifying moment she thought his rage might now be directed at her. But as he drew close, she saw the raw, naked fear beneath the fury. He reached her, his large hands hovering for a second before they landed gently on her shoulders, his touch a stark contrast to the violence she had just witnessed. He scanned her from head to toe, his gaze frantic. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice a raw rasp. "Did it touch you?" Elara could only shake her head, the silver knife falling from her nerveless fingers and clattering to the floor. The bond between them was a screaming, vibrant thing. She was awash in the fierce, overwhelming wave of his protectiveness, so potent it felt like a physical embrace. He had felt her terror as if it were his own, and now he was flooding their connection with a profound, almost desperate relief that she was unharmed. The adrenaline finally crashed and her body began to tremble violently. Seeing this, Lucian pulled her against his hard chest, his arms wrapping around her in an embrace that was less about comfort and more about staking a claim. He held her as if he could physically weld her to his side and never let the world touch her again. Chapter 12. The Mark of the Alpha. Lucian held her until the trembling subsided, his powerful frame a shield against the carnage surrounding them. When he finally drew back, his expression was grim, the Alpha's fury replaced by a cold, strategic calculus. He surveyed the wreckage of his home, his gaze lingering on the smoking wound Elara had inflicted on the shifter. A flicker of something, pride, respect, crossed his features before he masked it. "This was a test," he said, his voice low and hard. "They sent a probe to gauge our defenses. To see if the book's new keeper was a weakness." He looked at her and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "You were not." While he efficiently and grimly dealt with the bodies, a task he performed with a disturbing lack of emotion, Elara huddled on a leather sofa, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. Her mind reeled. She had stabbed a creature, had watched men die. The quiet, orderly world of her archives was a distant memory, a life that belonged to someone else. When he was finished, he came to her. The rapid healing she'd only read about in fiction was happening before her eyes. A few shallow cuts on his arms were already closing, the skin knitting itself back together. The sight was another stark reminder of the chasm between their worlds. "The physical assault failed," he began, kneeling before her so they were at eye level. "But they attempted another attack, a mental one. You felt it. They tried to touch your mind, to influence you through the book's connection." Elara shuddered, remembering the oily, violating sensation. "You stopped it." "I did," he confirmed. "But I cannot be in your head every second of every day. The bond we share through the book is a beacon, but it is also a gateway. They will try again, and next time they may be more subtle. They could plant thoughts, create illusions, drive you mad to get you to relinquish the book." A new kind of fear, more insidious than the threat of physical violence, crept over her. "So what do we do?" His gaze was heavy, unwavering. "I have to protect you on a level beyond locks and shutters. I have to shield your mind. To do that, I must reinforce our bond. With my own mark." Elara recoiled. "Mark me? Like an animal? Like property?" "No," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "Like a member of my pack. Like someone under my explicit protection. The Alpha's mark is a magical ward. It would surround your consciousness with my own, making it impossible for another to intrude. It would tie you to me, to my life force. It is the only way I can guarantee your safety." He was presenting it as a logical, necessary step for her survival. But through the bond she felt the truth of his emotions, the deeper, primal truth he was trying to conceal. This wasn't just about protection. It was about possession. The fierce, untamed part of him, the Alpha, wanted to brand her, to claim her in a way that the book had not, to make her irrevocably, undeniably his. Chapter 13. The Price of Protection. "Absolutely not," Elara said, her voice shaking but firm. She scrambled off the sofa, putting distance between them. "You kidnapped me. You've locked me in this sterile cage. And now you want to brand me." The librarian in her, the woman who dealt in facts and reason, was revolting against the primal, magical nightmare she'd been thrust into. "There has to be another way. A ward, a spell, something in that book of yours." "There is no other way." Lucian's patience snapped and he rose to his full, intimidating height. The raw power rolling off him made the air feel thin. "The book chose you, human. Created a bond that my enemies can exploit. The only magic strong enough to shield a bond of that magnitude is an Alpha's. It is not a request. It is a necessity." "It's a violation," she shot back, her fear making her bold. "Everything you've done since you crashed into my life has been a violation. You don't get to just claim me." He saw the defiant terror in her eyes, and a flicker of his own frustration warred with a reluctant understanding. To her, this was an archaic, barbaric custom. To him, it was a sacred, fundamental law of his world. For a moment, he looked utterly lost, a being of immense power unable to bridge the gap between their realities. He took a deep breath, visibly reining in his anger. "Elara," he said, his voice softer, more controlled. Come with me. He led her not to the bedroom but to a room she hadn't seen, a personal study. Unlike the rest of the penthouse, this space was warm and lived in. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were crammed with books, real books, their spines worn and cracked with age. A heavy oak desk stood near the window, and the air smelled of old paper, leather, and him. It was his sanctuary, and bringing her here was a concession, an offering of trust. He gestured to the book which he had moved to his desk. You are the key, he murmured. Only you can make it show us the truth. Ask it. Ask it to show you the Alpha's ward. Hesitantly, Elara approached the desk. She was terrified of the deluge of memories, but she needed to know. She placed her hand on the cover. Instead of trying to read, she focused her intent, thinking the words Alpha's ward. The book responded instantly. A single page glowed, the script shifting and reforming under her gaze into an image. It showed a female figure, shimmering and vulnerable, surrounded by shadowy, grasping hands. Then a second figure, a male radiating golden light, placed his hand on her. A brilliant web of light erupted from the point of contact, forming an impenetrable, glowing cage around the woman, repelling the shadows. It wasn't a mark of ownership she saw, but one of absolute, magical sanctuary. She pulled her hand back, her heart pounding. The book had shown her the truth. This wasn't about control in the way she understood it. It was about a fusion, a sharing of strength. It was still a terrifying prospect, a surrender of a part of herself, but she now understood the alternative was to leave her mind open and defenseless. She looked at Lucian, who had watched her, his expression unreadable. I'll do it, she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. But I am not your property, Lucian. I am not a thing to be owned. This is for my survival. Nothing more. A muscle feathered in his jaw. He knew she was wrong. He knew this would bind them in ways that went far beyond mere survival. But he simply nodded. For your survival, he agreed, the lie a heavy weight in the silence of the room. Chapter 14. Branded by Moonlight. He waited until nightfall. The ruined shutters had been cleared away, and the full moon cast a stark silver light across the dark penthouse, painting everything in shades of pearl and shadow. The raw, primal energy of the moon seemed to amplify the tension between them, stripping away the thin veneer of civility they had managed to construct. It must be done now, Lucian said, his voice a low thrum in the quiet. When the moon is at its peak. My power is strongest then. He led her to the center of the vast living room, into a pool of pure moonlight. I will need to touch your skin, he said, his gaze intense. The mark must be placed over your heart. Elara's breath hitched. Her hands trembled as she reached for the hem of her sweater, her movements slow and deliberate. It felt like a ritual, a sacrifice. She pulled the garment over her head, leaving her in the thin, vulnerable silk of her camisole. The cool night air kissed her skin, raising goosebumps. She felt exposed, her racing pulse visible in the hollow of her throat. Lucian approached her, his sheer size and proximity overwhelming. He moved with a reverence that was at odds with his violent nature. He didn't reach for her immediately. Instead, he held his hand out, palm up, an offering. She watched as his fingernails sharpened, elongating slightly into wicked black talons. With one, he sliced a shallow line across his own palm. Blood, dark in the moonlight, welled instantly. My blood, my power, my life force, he murmured, his voice husky. It will recognize you. It will defend you. He raised his bleeding hand and gently, reverently, smeared a trail of his blood over her chest, directly above her heart. The warmth of it was a shocking intimacy against her cool skin. The moment his blood touched her, the bond between them flared, becoming a roaring inferno of sensation. His power, raw and untamed, surged into her. She gasped, her knees weakening as she was flooded with his essence. A fierce possessiveness, a crushing loneliness that spanned a century, and a desire for her so profound it felt like a physical blow. He lowered his head, his face buried in the curve of her neck, inhaling her scent as if he were a dying man breathing his last gulp of air. Elara, he groaned, her name a sound of pure agony and ecstasy. Then he bit her. It was not a savage act. It was a claiming. His fangs, sharp and sudden, pierced the delicate skin of her shoulder at the juncture of her neck. A sharp sting of pain was instantly overwhelmed by a tidal wave of exquisite pleasure that radiated from the wound, flooding her entire body. A moan was torn from her lips as his power, his very soul, poured into her through the bite. The silver mark on her hand blazed with light, and she felt rather than saw a new mark bloom over her heart where his blood lay. A faint, intricate symbol, his alpha mark, glowing with a soft, golden light. He released her, his breathing harsh and ragged. He was shaking, his own control shattered by the primal intensity of the ritual. The bite mark on her shoulder was already healing, leaving 2 small, perfect punctures that tingled with residual energy. Her entire being hummed, vibrated with his power. She felt stronger, her senses sharper. And she could feel him, his every emotion, his every thought as clearly as if they were her own. Chapter 15. The Aftermath. In the silent, moon-drenched room, the world had fundamentally and irrevocably shifted. Elara's body was a live wire, thrumming with an energy that was not her own. His power sang in her blood, a wild and exhilarating symphony. The city lights beyond the window seemed brighter, the distant sounds of traffic sharper. She could feel the subtle shift of air currents in the room. She could feel him. The bond was no longer a simple thread connecting 2 points. It was a vast, complex web woven directly into the fabric of her soul. His turbulent emotions washed over her. A possessiveness so fierce it was breathtaking, a profound relief, and beneath it all, a raw, aching hunger that was directed entirely at her. It was terrifying and intoxicating. Lucian took a staggered step back, his hand coming up to wipe a trickle of her blood from the corner of his mouth. The act was so blatantly predatory it sent a shiver of pure primal fear and excitement down her spine. His golden eyes were blown wide, dark with a turbulent storm of instinct and desire. The alpha who had just marked his mate was at war with the century-old guardian trying to maintain control. For the first time Elara realized he was just as trapped in this as she was. What have you done?" she whispered, her own voice sounding distant. "I have protected you," he rasped, his voice thick and strained. He was struggling, fighting a battle within himself she could now feel as a tangible force. "Your mind is shielded. They cannot touch you now." But it was so much more than that, and they both knew it. He had woven himself into her. She lifted a hand to her shoulder, her fingers tracing the faint twin marks his fangs had left. They tingled, a permanent reminder of his claim. Over her heart she could feel a soft warmth where his mark now lay hidden beneath her skin. He turned away from her, presenting his broad back as he fought for composure. "You will feel things," he said, his words clipped. "My energy settling. Your senses will be heightened for a time. It will pass." He was lying. He knew and she knew that nothing about this would ever pass. This new intimacy was terrifying. She could feel the desperate loneliness he kept so carefully locked away, the immense weight of the secrets he carried. And he, in turn, could now feel the fluttering anxiety that was the baseline of her existence, but also the deep well of stubborn resilience she kept hidden. They were laid bare to each other in a way that surpassed any physical nakedness. The immediate threat of the scorned seemed to have faded, replaced by a far more dangerous and complicated conflict. The battle was no longer at the gates of the penthouse. It was here in the charged space between the two of them. They were no longer just a guardian and his key, a kidnapper and his victim. They were alpha and marked, predator and prey, and the most frightening part was that Elara was no longer certain which one she was. Chapter 16. Whispers from the Soul. The aftermath of the attack left a stillness in the penthouse that was more unsettling than the violence itself. The bond, now sealed and absolute, was a constant humming presence. Elara felt Lucian's restlessness as if it were her own, a primal need to patrol, to hunt, to secure. But she was no longer a passive victim. The power thrumming in her veins, his power, had awakened a part of herself she never knew existed, a core of unyielding strength. "Hiding is not a plan," she stated, her voice clear and steady in the quiet of his study. She stood before the oak desk where the archive of souls lay. "It's a countdown. We need to know what they want. Specifically." Lucian, who had been staring out at the city, turned to her. He was reluctant, the memory of her pain when she last touched the book a fresh wound in his mind. "It's too dangerous, Elara. The influx could overwhelm you." "Your mark protects me," she countered, her gaze unwavering. She could feel his protective instincts warring with his logical mind. "It shields me. You said so yourself. We can't fight an enemy we don't understand." He was right. Her new fortitude, a direct result of his claiming, left him with no argument. With a grim nod, he stood beside her as she reached for the book. This time, as her fingers touched the ancient leather, the connection was different. The chaotic deluge of memories was still there, a roaring ocean of 1,000 lives, but the Alpha's mark was an anchor. It allowed her to stand in the heart of the storm without being swept away. "I'm looking for our enemy," she whispered, focusing her intent. "The leader of the scorned." The book responded. The sea of whispers coalesced and a vision bloomed in her mind's eye. She saw a man, his face scarred and cruel, his eyes burning with a fanatic's zeal. His name was Silas. But she saw more than his face, she saw his ambition. The archive didn't just hold history. It held rituals, forbidden magic from an age when shifters were raw, untamed beings. Silas wasn't seeking power in a general sense. He was hunting for a specific blasphemous ritual. A ceremony to sever a shifter's soul from their beast, creating an army of immortal, soulless husks, unkillable and completely under his command. The vision sharpened and Elara gasped, seeing a place she recognized. It was a chamber deep beneath the main library, older than the building itself, carved from the living rock of the city's foundation. It was a place of immense power where the book had first been bound. It was the source. And it was where Silas believed he could perform his ritual. "I see him," she breathed, pulling her hand back. "His name is Silas. I know what he wants. And I know where he means to do it. Beneath the library." Chapter 17. The Crucible of Trust. The knowledge changed everything. They were no longer on the defensive. They had a target, a goal beyond mere survival. To stop Silas from unleashing his soulless army upon the world. The dynamic between them shifted from captor and captive to a fragile, dangerous partnership. The penthouse became a training ground. "Your connection to the book is a weapon," Lucian explained, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. "But it is a wild one. You must learn to control it." Their training was a crucible of intimacy. To teach her to shield her thoughts, he had to press his own against her mind, a mental touch more invasive than any physical one. To teach her to harness her heightened senses, he guided her through mediations, his large, warm hands on her shoulders, his voice a steady anchor in her ear. He taught her how to hold the silver knife not with the frantic energy of a cornered animal, but with the deadly calm of a predator. He would move fast as smoke and she had to learn to anticipate, to block, to strike. During one such session he disarmed her easily, the knife skittering away. He backed her against the wall, his body caging hers, his forearm pressed lightly against her throat. Her heart hammered, but it wasn't from fear. It was the thrill, the proximity, the raw power radiating from him. The air was thick with their mingled scents, with the unspoken, undeniable lust that the bond amplified between them 1,000-fold. "You're distracted," he growled, his golden eyes searching hers, seeing the desire that mirrored his own. "So are you," she breathed, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. The last of his control fractured. With a guttural groan, his mouth crashed down on hers. It was not like their first kiss, which had been a desperate act of claiming. This was a mutual surrender, a raw, frantic collision of two souls who had been forged together in violence and fear. It was a kiss of biting lips and tangled tongues, a desperate, consuming expression of the tension that had been building since the moment she touched the book. He lifted her, her legs wrapping around his waist as he pinned her to the wall, their bodies moving together in a frantic, desperate rhythm. It wasn't just desire. It was a furious, passionate acknowledgement of the unbreakable chain that bound them. Chapter 18. A Trap of Ink and Soul. In the quiet aftermath of their passion, a new resolve settled. They knew Silas would come for the book for Elara. Waiting for his attack was suicide. They had to draw him out on their terms. "The chamber," Elara said, her head resting on Lucian's bare chest, his steady heartbeat a comforting drum beneath her ear. "The one I saw in the vision. It's a place of power. We can use it." A daring, terrifying plan formed between them. Elara, using her deep and now controllable connection to the book, would project a powerful magical lure from the hidden sub-basement chamber. She would make it seem as though she, the new keeper, was attempting to harness the chamber's energy, an irresistible bait for Silas. They would lure him and his inner circle into the one place Lucian knew better than any other. Lucian made a single call, speaking in a low, guttural language Elara didn't understand. I have allies, he explained, his voice grim. What's left of my pack? They will secure the library's perimeter. No one gets in or out without our say. The hours leading up to the trap were the longest of Elara's life. The penthouse, once a prison, now felt like the last bastion of safety. As night fell, cloaking the city in darkness, Lucian came to her. The walls between them, battered down by shared danger and sealed by their passion, were now completely gone. For 100 years, this city was just a territory to watch over, he confessed, his voice raw with an emotion she now understood as profound loneliness. The book was a duty, a burden. It was all silent. Then I heard you. Your soul called to mine across the city, and the silence ended. Tears pricked at Elara's eyes. I spent my whole life hiding in the quiet, she whispered, her hand finding his. I thought it was safe. But it wasn't living. You dragged me into the storm, Lucian, and for the first time I feel alive. He pulled her into his arms and they made love, not with the frantic hunger of their earlier encounter, but with a deep, soul-shattering tenderness. It was an act of final surrender to the bond, a desperate, beautiful promise made in the face of death. It was a declaration of war against the darkness, sealed not with blood but with love. Chapter 19. The Echoes of Battle. They moved through the darkened, silent library like ghosts. Lucian's allies, grim-faced shifters who moved with the same predatory grace as he, had secured the perimeter. They gave Elara looks of awe and respect. To them she was the Alpha's chosen, the woman who had awoken their legacy. Deep in the sub-basement, the air grew cold, thick with the scent of ancient stone and dormant magic. The chamber was circular, its walls covered in faded, spiraling script. In the center, a simple stone altar pulsed with a faint energy. Elara placed the archive of souls upon it. Now, Lucian whispered, melting into the shadows. Elara closed her eyes and reached out with her mind. She didn't just project a lure of raw power, she projected a whisper of the ritual Silas craved, a single tempting thread of forbidden knowledge pulled from the book's heart. The wait was short. A grating sound echoed from the tunnel as a hidden stone door was forced open. Silas strode in, flanked by his 5 most powerful warriors. His cruel eyes locked onto Elara and the book. The little librarian playing with magic she cannot comprehend, he sneered. Give me the book and I will grant you a quick death. That was Lucian's cue. He exploded from the darkness, a blur of righteous fury. The chamber erupted into a maelstrom of violence. His allies engaged the guards while Lucian charged Silas, a clash of alphas that shook the very stones. Elara was not a bystander. With her hands on the book, she was the conductor of a psychic orchestra. She didn't create new magic, she wielded the book's memories. She flooded the chamber with the ghostly images of Lucian's ancestors, ancient warriors who rose from the walls to distract and confuse the scorned. She conjured the sound of shattering rock and the smell of sulfur, disorienting them, turning the chamber into a chaotic nightmare. The final battle was between Lucian and Silas. It was brutal and personal. Silas, fueled by generations of resentment, fought with a viciousness that pressed Lucian back. Your ancestors destroyed my line for seeking this power, he roared, his claws raking across Lucian's chest. This is not ambition. It is justice. He gained the advantage, wounding Lucian badly in the leg. As Lucian staggered, Silas raised his claws for the killing blow. In that instant, Elara did the unthinkable. She plunged her consciousness deep into the book, past the rituals and histories, into the raw, living soul of the archive. She found the memory of Silas's ancestors being put to death. It was a brutal, agonizing memory, filled with the terror and pain of his bloodline. With a final, desperate push of will, she didn't project an illusion. She projected the pure, unadulterated memory directly into Silas's mind. He screamed, a high, piercing sound of agony as he was forced to relive his deepest trauma. His entire body convulsed, his attack forgotten. The psychic shock was absolute. That single second of incapacitation was all Lucian needed. Chapter 20. The Alpha and his Librarian. With a final desperate surge of strength, Lucian ended the fight. The psychic echo of Silas's pain vanished, leaving a profound silence in its wake. The remaining scorned, seeing their leader fall, were quickly dispatched by Lucian's allies. The threat was over. In the aftermath, amidst the blood and the quiet, Elara rushed to Lucian's side. He was badly wounded, but the shifter healing process had already begun, sluggishly stitching his flesh back together. She helped him to his feet, her smaller frame a surprisingly steady support. The bond between them was a calm, deep river, a current of shared relief and profound connection. They returned to her archive, the quiet, dusty room in the library's heart that now felt like the center of the world. It was her sanctuary and now it was his. As Lucian healed, leaning against a sturdy oak table, the last of the walls between them crumbled into dust. This was no longer a bond of magic and necessity. It was a bond of choice, of respect, of love. When he was able to stand on his own, he turned to her. The golden light in his eyes was soft, filled with a century of loneliness washed away. "In my world, the Alpha's mark is a claim," he said, his voice quiet and serious. "But I do not want to claim you, Elara. I want to choose you. I want you to choose me. Be my mate. Not because the book demands it, but because my soul does." A slow, brilliant smile spread across Elara's face. "I'm a librarian, Lucian," she said softly. "My whole life has been about stories. I think this is my favorite one." She stood on her toes and kissed him, a kiss of promise and new beginnings. The story ended and began in the quiet of the Special Collections archive. The ancient book lay open on the table between them. She was no longer just its accidental keeper. She was its librarian, its partner. He was no longer its solitary guardian. He was her alpha, her protector. Together they were a new story, a new legacy. Elara placed her hand on the worn leather of the book, and a moment later Lucian's larger, warmer hand covered hers, a silent vow in the heart of the library. Their future stretched before them, a blank page waiting to be filled.